Hello and welcome to The Base. This is episode 4 of our After Brando series, where we examine the life and career and legacy of significant and influential actors. This week we are doing Laurence Olivier, actually a pre-Brando, overlap with Brando actor. And to talk us through his life, we are joined with Simon Roberts.
Hello.
Simon, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Can you introduce yourself to the Base crowd?
Yes, I feel I have to be very open here and say that I'm not a professional actor. I'm what you'd call an actor manqué. I was sort of somebody who wanted to become a professional Shakespearean actor and never achieved it. I was what was disparagingly called back in the 60s a university actor. So I went to university, did an English and a history degree, and spent most of my time putting on plays or being in plays. And so I never went to drama school. So what qualification do I have to talk about this? Well, I I fell in love with Shakespeare, especially at about the age of 16. I saw the English Shakespeare Company, who were sort of a couple of people, Michael Pennington and Michael Bogdanov, who were disgruntled with the RSC, and they formed their own touring company to do kind of a sort of Brechtian epic theatre approach to Shakespeare. And I saw Richard II and felt this is what I wanted to do. And then I found Olivier and Henry V, and it activated something in me that I wanted to pursue. And naively, I thought, a meretricious display of talent that people said I had would be sufficient to whisk me serenely into the world of classical theatre. And of course, that's not how it works. Simon Callow said, you've got to have the talent for having talent. And that's what I didn't have. But I was interested enough to follow Olivier as an exemplar of a kind of energetic acting that attracted me. And so I've come to talk about it today to discuss the tension between the idea of Olivier as an actor and Marlon Brando, who kind of effectively succeeds in the minds of people as the epitome of a kind of perfection of acting.
Yeah, perfect. So we thought we'd do this podcast on Olivier because his name is so synonymous with the craft itself, right? And even though we started this podcast with this idea that lots of things follow from Brando, you can't really study the history of acting without looking at Olivier. So that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this. There's a lot to get through in this podcast. It's a huge, incredible life, an incredible career, and it spans the entire, basically nearly the entire 20th century. He's born in 1907, right? So, Simon, could you try and give us could you try and take us through
Yes.
Olivier's life as best as you can?
Here's a sort of whistle-stop tour. As you say, born in 1907, his father's a high Anglican clergyman who, unlike many parents, encourages him to go to the theatre. His brother, Richard, is going off to India to be a rubber planter, and he's going to miss his brother, but this is a sort of glamorous career, back at that time. And he says to his father, well, can I follow Dickie out to India? And his father says, don't be an idiot, you're going on the stage. Father packs him off to London, to a lady called Elsie Fogarty, who teaches at Central Drama School. And he says, you've got to go down there, talk to this lady, and you've got to get a bursary to get some training and get you on the stage. He manages this perfectly, and then he is launched into the West End in the early 20s. And he begins to make some impact there. He eventually works with Noel Coward in the West End, doing Private Lives. Before that, he's doing various West End productions. In the early 30s, he goes off to Hollywood, tries to kind of break into film. He's a bit rubbish, to be honest. And by his own, descriptions of his manner as an actor, he was very imitative. He was trying to, he largely modeled a lot of his performances on an actor called Gerald du Maurier, who you can go and see. There's a clip on YouTube of Gerald du Maurier in a film I think called Escape from 1930, and he's not the most startling actor. He's kind of let's say, efficient at getting the dialogue out, but he's kind of stiff. So Olivier saw this as part of what they thought was the new realism of the time. They were aware of things like Stanislavski, and people like du Maurier were people that Olivier consciously said modeled himself on for a long time. He goes off to America, as I say, doesn't kind of make it in Hollywood. He's seen, and he sees himself as somewhat arrogant when he's out there. He works with Sam Goldwyn and a director called William Wyler. And one day, I think William Wyler, the director, says to him, don't be so stagey. And Olivier has a fit of pique, and he says, well, maybe your anemic little medium can't recognize greatness. And all of the people in Hollywood just laugh at him. And he realizes later that he's dropped a bollock on that, and that, film is going to be the future. But sort of somewhat shamefacedly, he comes back to England. And he gets involved with people like John Gielgud. Famously, they do Romeo and Juliet together. This is about 1935. And they alternate the roles, which is an interesting idea, one that's always attracted me about getting a buddy to do a play and alternate the main roles. I mean, famously, there was an example of Ian Richardson and Richard Pascoe doing it with Richard II and Bolingbroke, I think, back in the 70s. Not done so much nowadays, probably seen as a bit of a feat. And he begins to develop himself as a Shakespearean actor. And this is very much the time when the scene is dominated by adoration of John Gielgud, who has this beautiful, mellifluous speaking voice. And in Olivier's eyes, this is not kind of rooted in a realism of character. It's rooted in a sort of ethereal beauty. Olivier is often described as singing the verse. And Olivier wants to have something more organic. I mean, I spoke to you guys before and talked about the idea of you could use a comparison of, lines of code of software. Gielgud is someone who can read the code aloud, but Olivier runs it as software. He sees verse as the sort of direct energizing force of personality in a performance, whereas Gielgud has a more rhetorical, poetic style. Olivier famously talks about Gielgud as saying, well, John is like the obverse of me. He's all spirit and an ethereal grace, whereas I'm much more earthy and physical and muscular in my approach to acting. So he begins to develop Shakespeare along those lines. He then goes back to Hollywood, end of the 30s. Famously, he plays Heathcliff in a version of Wuthering Heights, and he's become a smouldering matinee idol. He's out there as well, doing films like Rebecca. He's with Vivien Leigh, and she obviously scores a major coup with Gone with the Wind. So they become a kind of glamorous, theatre and film power couple, like Burton and Taylor would, 20 years later. So this time he comes back from America to England. We're into the Second World War. He actually, like a lot of actors like Ralph Richardson, joins the military. He's in the Fleet Air Arm as a pilot. He's not a very good pilot. He actually he writes off a couple of aircraft. So he's not seen to be innately talented in that respect. But he has a serviceable couple of years before he comes out of the military in 1944, and he makes what is very consciously a propagandistic version of Henry V. So this is the one of the sort of first great searing, towering Olivier performances that you see. After that, he's in London running the Old Vic Theatre. And he's putting on productions of Henry V, as well as other things like Oedipus and Richard III, which comes along, in about 1944, but also in the film version 10 years later. And he immortalizes that as kind of the part that, in a way, everybody thinks of him being associated with. He, in between those times, does other productions in the West End. He goes back to America in the late 50s. He works with Marilyn Monroe. He does a film called Prince and the Showgirl. He finds that a very difficult experience. And then he goes through a sort of a bit of a career doldrum in the later part of the 50s. And then the Angry Young Men come along, and he gets involved with John Osborne and plays Archie Rice in The Entertainer. This is at the Royal Court. And then there's a film made of it later. And this kind of represents, in many people's eyes, a sort of sea change from the Olivier people think of as a heavily external and outside-in kind of actor. He does The Entertainer. That makes a great sort of, if you like, revival for enthusiasm for Olivier. He can really do, the kind of naturalistic performance that people like, Brando are sort of tearing up the world with at that point. But, he's an older guy now, so it's kind of, in a way, that film in particular, sort of like a farewell to the old style of performances with, eyeshadow and nose putty and ridiculous hats. He then goes towards a period of being the actor manager, and this was always a thing from the the 19th century. People like Henry Irving and so on. The idea of the actor manager was the kind of peak appreciation of career that an actor could pursue. And at that point, he's running Chichester Festival Theatre, and then he is invited to become the man who founds the National Theatre. And eventually, he runs it, I think, for about 10 years before leaving. At that point, the National Theatre building on the South Bank is ready. And he then goes on into doing more film work. He goes back to America. He does things like Marathon Man, films like Sleuth, and so on, and television later on as we get into the early 80s, famously in Brideshead Revisited, and various other things, before he becomes, the elder statesman of acting, part of what they call the sort of the Trinity, him, Ralph Richardson and John Gielgud, and then sometimes there's a kind of fourth Beatle, in the form of Alec Guinness as well, who's added on there. But at that point, he is around in various things. He does a television version of Shylock with Jonathan Miller for the BBC in I think the late 70s or early 80s, and he does a King Lear in 1983, and then various films. He's around the place. He's, Clash of the Titans and The Jazz Singer, stuff like that. Eventually, his mortal coil expires in 1989, and then it's about, I suppose, the legacy of Olivier in many people's minds, as you say, some people, the greatest actor of all time. For many people, he divides the room, and he's seen as, quote, cold and technical because of he's not a method actor with an internal process. He's an actor who, in a way, is a little bit like a magpie. He takes bits from here and there, and a character, as he says, kind of swims in the middle of them, which he can then grab onto. So that's more or less Olivier. I feel it's kind of, it's not the perfect career in my mind, because the perfect career for a young actor, of course, is you step out of drama school and you get a brilliant part and you're just famous for the rest of your life. So you have the pick of parts. Olivier kind of, in his early career, said he was a bit of a clod. He was constantly laughing on stage, corpsing. Noel Coward kind of had to beat it out of him. He was sort of crude in his style. He didn't really appreciate an acting process until he became someone whom these kinds of heavy Shakespearean roles were centered around, and then he forged, if you like, an idea of an English tradition again. Now, I'm not saying an English tradition that goes back to the 19th and 18th century or anything like that, but a sense in which the English actor uses various kinds of approaches. Modern trained actors like yourselves will have been given groundings in Stanislavski and Stella Adler and all of these kinds of things. Olivier rejected a lot of these things in a sense. He does an interview with Melvyn Bragg for the South Bank show, and Bragg is trying to kind of press him on, what's your technique? And Olivier's very much, well, that's a trade secret. I can't really give you that. And he toys with Bragg a bit, but it seems it's framed as if he's a bit insecure being asked about it, as if we've moved into an era where the only authentic way to act is to adopt the post-Stanislavski techniques of the method, the actor's studio, Strasbourg, and so on. And Olivier, he meets Strasbourg when he's over in America doing Prince and the Showgirl with Marilyn. He doesn't like the way Strasbourg has this thing of breaking actors down. He's concerned that Strasbourg has a kind of punitive method, and it's doing more to erode the confidence of the young American actors than it is to build them up. But there is a sort of masochistic element in that American scene as well of, Anthony Sher talked about this once. He said in American schools, they tell you to, find your damage, find your inner damage, and you use that as the motor of your creativity. And Olivier he's not really for that, but he's very impressed with Brando. He thinks he's a genius, and I think, it could be, him being sort of tactically humble, you could say, but I think he genuinely recognizes, as anybody does, the sheer raw force of a performer like Brando. So I think he's wise to acknowledge that and to realize he himself represents an older tradition, which I was thinking a lot about this. You can't really convince people of today, in a sense, because to some extent we've lost the conventions of going to the theatre and seeing performances in these cavernous spaces where technical requirements like voice projection were key. And that was also, I think, meshed with things like the way the industry ran for many years, like the closed shop. You couldn't get into the business without union membership. And the idea behind that was kind of like quality control. And that's why, in a sense, the technical issues mattered, because if you simply didn't come up to snuff and couldn't be heard at the back of the vast Alhambra in whatever provincial town you were in, you weren't going to be hired, and they thought you shouldn't be hired. So, in a sense, the forcefulness of delivery of the English acting tradition, which is kind of seen as slightly ridiculous by people focused on film and method and naturalism, is contrasted, let's say, with Brando. And in a way, that's the most interesting part to talk about, how Olivier stands in regard to yourselves as young actors, what people see in him, what they feel about him. Are they moved? Are they not moved? And the reasons why. So I've spoken a lot, but I'll throw that open.
Brilliant. Oh, yeah, absolutely brilliant summary of the life there. So very, very succinct and efficient. I just wanted to ask, maybe before we get into discussing our emotional or otherwise responses to him now, because you were mentioning his method there, and I remember hearing and reading things about his approach to character. He's sort of a character actor who happens to have matinee idol looks and be sort of devastatingly handsome, right?
Yeah.
And there's all this stuff about him finding, I don't know, the nose or the shoes. What do we know of how he approached character?
I think it's very much like that. And I mean, without making invidious comparisons of myself to Laurence Olivier, I sort of felt the same thing. I mean, I've talked to you guys before about how much I bitterly envy actors who went to drama school, because it feels to me as if you go to a drama school and they say, come in, there's a secret room here, and they open this thing a bit like the Ark of the Covenant, and truth kind of shines out, and all the actors are infused with this superb set of tools to make performances with. And you kind of, if you like, empirically develop something when you're a university actor by pulling stuff together. And that's the most immediate way, I suppose, a lot of people do that. And that's what Olivier did. As you say, he felt it was externalities and it was disguises and costumes. I mean, one of the things I found really interesting about Olivier and Brando is the contrast in terms of they're both about a form of masculinity in a way. And in Olivier's case and Brando's case, there are sort of questions of relationships to parents. I mean, famously, I think Brando's mother had quite a difficult life. She was an alcoholic. She was quite, damaged as a person in that sense that, the Actors Studio are talking about. And Olivier's mother dies when I think he's 12 or 13. I mean, this often sort of features with a lot of very driven kinds of performers, that there's a sort of fracture in the family of some kind. Brando's father, I think, he's very kind of distant and critical. And Olivier's father, while not perhaps critical, he is sort of distant in a way. But Olivier learns something from him as a performer. So he learns to, observe the way his father preaches in the church and the way that he kind of, manipulates the congregation in telling the story, dropping his voice or putting in a bit of pathos. The sort of techniques that you learn by, I remember there was a Twitter exchange a few weeks ago, and I said something about acting, about, as an actor, you often start by imitating people, and that's fine. And I think somebody came in and said, no, you shouldn't imitate people, you should be yourself. And it's like, well, no, you can't. Like children learn things by imitating to begin with. I mean, an actor I respect a great deal called Andrew Jarvis, who was part of the English Shakespeare Company, gave a fantastic Richard III. He said the same thing, pretty much, you kind of do start by copying, and then you try to recreate in your own terms what the actor is doing. And I certainly did, like, Olivier did, have people I fixated on very early, that you kind of, you go through periods as a sort of teenager in your 20s where you think, well, I'm doing my John Hurt now. Or I'm doing my Ian Richardson, or I'm doing my Derek Jacobi, and these were the kinds of people in the sort of the in my mind that I was kind of modeling skill sets on, how to develop the voice, and Olivier was very much that man, and famously, when he went to London to meet Elsie Fogarty to go for Central, she said to him, there's a couple of criticisms I have of you. So when you're doing this speech, I think it's from Romeo and Juliet about I can't remember the line, but it's about being quick to quarrel. And she says you don't need to make fencing gestures when you deliver that line. But the other thing, and he said she took her finger and she ran it down my forehead and she said, you have a weakness here. So there was something in the way, the way people, as it were, you may get this in drama school, they talk about where you center your body, where your kind of energy is kind of focused in your body. Some people are very much up here, some people are down in the groin, and some people are way down in their feet, to give a sort of crude example of where people's, their locomotion and their vocal energy comes from. So Olivier is aware of weaknesses in himself. He has also what's described as a sort of almost Neanderthal low hairline. He's got very dark coloration, very thick hair, and he thinks of himself as a bit of a clod, and people sort of reflect that back to him. So he tries to physically refine himself. He's very conscious of having a slightish physique, and he says, I was determined to kind of build myself up and, go to the gym, well into his 50s to make something of himself. And that was often commented on later, that he had a physicality that was about this body that was made into more than he'd been given originally. And I think that's something that for a lot of outside-in actors is, you're not born with a perfect voice. You're not born with a perfect physiognomy.
Yeah, there's a great picture here in the biography of him hanging out with the Swedish Olympic coach, and it's a lovely image there of him.
Yeah. He was very much, as you see there, in the mode of, again, imitating actors who were popular in the day. One thing he did was he cut his moustache in the style of Ronald Colman, who was a very a ubiquitous kind of a film star. And so you have Olivier, that kind of, as I say, that sort of magpie sensibility of something will hook you in. And as you say, it could be a walk, it could be a facial feature, a piece of costume, whatever. That gives you a sense, I think lots of people have this. You can, you maybe as an actor, you're doing voices to yourself and the voice develops into the character because in a sense, you've taken a lot of information subconsciously, store it and reprocess it. And then, oh yes, I'm doing the voice of that guy I met, 15 years ago, who was he was a market trader, or this was a guy I spoke to on the phone who was a stockbroker, and something emerges from the fragment into a kind of life which is then expanded on, because you feel instinctively you can pull all these parts together. And it's not, if you like, an organized process, of what did he have for breakfast yesterday? How tall was his father?
It's like I do this, Simon. You think of like people I grew up with. I think of like, and I just find their tone, find their rhythms, and start to remember them. And they sort of that spawns a character from there. It's like, and then I kind of live within that. And it's a very fascinating part of the art form of acting is sort of mimetic kind of recreation of other humans.
Yes, instinctive processes, imitation, impersonation, these kinds of things. And people like Alec Guinness famously, he said, well, I just follow somebody around London for a day, and if I can get the walk that they're doing, that somehow reveals, it unpeels the rest of the character, and I can make that happen. And I think the thing I was going to say about Olivier versus Brando is they're both actors concerned with forms of masculinity. And the relation of that is contrasted, I think. I mean, this is Brando's biog, Songs My Mother Taught Me. Yeah. His relation to acting is often seen as a kind of very empathetic, intuitive sense of his ability to get into and build characters. Olivier's is Confessions of an Actor. There's a contrast there to me about someone who is very much available to the psychological method of people like Strasberg about opening up your insides and displaying them, and the Olivier method of actually you conceal the person. So his career is a confession. It's like I'm not really the person you think I was.
Yeah.
There's a level of artifice which I think for the American sensibility is kind of inauthentic. It's sort of a sin in a way to be inauthentic. I mean, and yet, you know, many people often feel, you know, the American idiom is something that is kind of hyper accentuated and insincere and kind of, in America, the actor has to be a kind of entrepreneur of themselves. You know, they are the product. In England, it's always amazing when you see actors. I mean, I take an example of a comedian, someone like Matt Berry, and he does a parody of an actor on a program, Toast of London. I mean, he kind of talks like that in a sort of silly actor voice. Yeah. And then you hear Matt Berry talking, and he's from somewhere in Bedfordshire, and he's got a kind of...
Yeah, I've worked with Matt Berry.
You know, so he's very understated as a person, but you know, we're in this business where you're very conscious that you are projecting something, and Olivier's not ashamed about that.
Matt Berry has got a very particular style. He's very odd actually to work with him. He's exactly like you said. He's very nice, down to earth, and then on set, I did a thing called Year of the Rabbit with him, and it was a similar.
Oh, yeah.
He's got this kind of very particular style of performance. Okay, Simon, I just wanted to sort of push back and on your early about Olivier's career.
Yeah,
because in preparing for this pod and looking through this all, I actually think he has got the perfect career. I think he has got. I think he has the greatest career possible. I mean, I see that at the early start of his life is a bit plodding and a bit. He sort of, it actually starts quite late, and you seem to find that he plays Romeo when he's 28, and I think he plays Hamlet when he's like 42 or 40 film. He often plays the roles a bit later on, but I also think that is probably quite common with actors, is that you can't often understand a role, particularly with the sort of the height of intellectualism within the roles within Shakespeare, until you're a bit older and you can go, I kind of get what it is to have the lust of an 18-year-old or something when you're 28. But if you go through his career, he's basically done everything. Now, despite whether we can get to like why people love him or why they don't in a minute, but he sort of ties together like everything. Like he ties America, he ties the kind of our relationship to method acting, he ties like managing a theatre, running a theatre, having a theatre named after him. He marries a star and has 20 years with Vivian Leigh, so he's kind of got the, you know, every great star has to have some kind of crazy relationship with another famous star. He's got that. He's played, in terms of Shakespeare, he plays all the great roles nearly. I don't know if he's done Macbeth, but whereas lots of these, did he do Macbeth? Right, yeah. So whereas lots of the American actors, Stella Adler says Brando is, until he's done these great roles, you don't really know. Whereas Olivier is throughout his career is taking these roles on, and then he has that really interesting period when he starts to kind of appear in these American films alongside the method actors and even the style of, I was looking at some of Marathon Man he does in, I think, 78 with Dustin Hoffman, just seeing him with the New York, is it in New York, Marathon Man?
Yeah.
Seeing that backdrop and the sort of style of camera, it reminds you instantly of the films we all see as the great films. Sitting within that aesthetic is really interesting to see. And I think he's absolutely brilliant in that film. And yeah, he's sort of he's done everything.
I'm really glad. I mean, of course, it was all a cunning plan for me to make you do that pushback. You know, it was reverse psychology. Actually, I'm really pleased to hear you say that, because I've had the impression, I mean, for a number of years, that Olivier was disprivileged in people's sense of what great acting is, especially nowadays. That I've had seen people, he's stagey, he's hammy, he's all of these kinds of things. And in a sense, his lineage descends obviously from the stage. And he carries the kind of, you know, muscular, you know, imprint of stage performer. But when you say that, it's very heartening. I mean, I was when I first sort of got into theatre, I sort of begged my way in to do some assisting on a play at the National back in 1996. Wasn't really assistant directing, which is what I wanted, but they said, well, we want somebody to give notes to the actors, and Judi Dench is doing a play. Will you work with the director and give the actors their notes? Which is a strange position to be in. I worked on that production, and I was in the National one day, and you go up to the first floor and there's a sort of canteen on one side and then there's a bar on the other side, and sometimes they used to have book sales in the bar, and I sort of went in there looking for sort of books. It was all books about theatre and acting. I was just meandering around with a chap in the company, Brian Cox's son, a guy called Alan Cox, very nice guy, and we were sort of looking at the books on sale, and I picked up the Olivier book, and I said, "Oh, fantastic, Olivier," and he said, "Yeah, bit passé," and I was distraught.
Right.
I thought
Yeah.
the young actors all hate him. It's over. I'm the only person who appreciates him. So that's sort of slightly bothered me for many years. That you're kind of it's as if you're trying to get somebody interested in a music hall entertainer of the mid 19th century.
Yeah. And but his style, you would be almost insulted as an actor. Like it would be like, don't be like Laurence Olivier in this because it's too much. There'd be this quite disrespectful attitude towards him. We'd all moved on from this man and this style, and we didn't want to be hammy and over the top. And so we now in 2026 can kind of look back at this character, and we are doing this with this podcast. We're going through these styles, and I'll open this up to you two in a minute. But I've been watching through different performances, and so I'm going to, with the verse in Shakespeare, right, he has a kind of singy way of doing it, right? And I have to say, sometimes I don't understand why he's doing that. And maybe you two are going to be angry that I said that, but I will say it kind of like, I'm not quite sure why he's like singing his way through it. I'm kind of like, why don't you just land on the thought? And he has these amazing moments where he looks around and he's clearly doing stuff with his performance. Like his Henry is different to his Hamlet. His Henry V is different to his Hamlet. There's just watching him turn as Henry is amazing. And then there are moments that I like, but it's not quite doing it for me. But then, I started to study different roles throughout his career. And the role that really struck me was Othello. Right, he blacks up as for Othello, and Othello is a difficult role to understand and to get right. And I was like, I was amazed by how good his Othello was. Right, and obviously, you're not really going to kind of get away with doing that now or necessarily want to do that, but he captures something about something other about Othello. Right, this otherness, and and I worked with an actor on it recently, and we tried it in a Nigerian accent, and you did it in the Nigerian accent, and all of a sudden it does open up Othello. There's something there, and it's really difficult for us as modern people, because everyone's so terrified of offending anyone, to kind of comment on these things. Shakespeare is writing a specific character from an ethnic background. He's doing it so with Shylock, right?
Yeah.
And Laurence Olivier also plays him, right? And so I was struck by how good Othello was, and then I watched him do Shylock, and Shakespeare writes Shylock as a Jewish man, right? Maybe stereotypically so, right? But stereotypes can be true as well at times. I know people don't want to say that, but that's true. And he captures this kind of he's doing this kind of, and you can see in Shakespeare's text, he's got this, he writes that.
I think he had a dental prosthesis actually when he was playing that part. So
did he? Right.
Yeah.
But I suppose what I'm sort of the point I'm getting towards is that weirdly the verse stuff, the kind of classical Shakespeare stuff, doesn't do it as much for me. But then I was watching character work, and there's a film called Khartoum where he plays an
General
Arab.
Gordon.
Yeah.
Well, no, so he's the Mahdi, isn't he? Yeah, he's the Mahdi.
Yeah, he's Muhammad.
Charlton Heston's got.
And he's doing he's doing it again, but like a different kind. And you dare do this. You imagine Timothée Chalamet today trying. No one would ever dare do this kind of stuff now. But it's artistically fascinating, and he actually. And then I was watching some of his more naturalistic films, and I was like, his range is kind of extraordinary, and it's artistically just quite spectacular what he does throughout his career. And yeah, I just was admiring it. Great. I'm just going to open that back to both of you. What do you think on these character roles and his style? What do you like the verse?
I'm interested to hear what Oliver has to say if he has any.
Yeah, sure. I completely agree with the Henry V. I don't like his Henry V. I don't really like that film, don't like that play anyway, but it's so singy, it's almost unbearable. And I agree with you about I remember it's King Lear is quite good, but the point that I'd like to throw in is that I think you used the phrase like muscular precision or something like that, that is so clearly evident in the Shakespeare roles, and that it allows him to unleash this like stream of energy. You can just see it, or even on the filmed stage productions, you can see the energy burning off him, even more so than Brando even. So God knows what it would have been like to be in the same room. But what I find kind of moving actually is that he takes that muscular precision and can actually do the naturalistic film screen acting later on. And I find it so impressive because I can see, like, the entertainer, even in the normal naturalistic scenes, not when he's on stage doing all the hammy stuff deliberately, you can see the precision underneath it.
Yes.
And that's what makes it, I think, some of the best acting ever.
He's a funny character, isn't he? Because he's at a transitional moment, when he's starting. I mean, film is kind of, again, this is a distinction that the director Peter Greenaway has made. A lot of film is just filmed theatre, in that sort of period. It's cameras out the front, you're sort of more or less on an equivalent of a theatre stage. And that's how, it's not the same as making a filmed theatre, so a lot of it kind of reads badly in a sense technically, and the sort of techniques and the way, for instance, I mean, when he comes to Hamlet, he's very conscious. He said, I wanted to make a film, so he tried doing things like this sort of chiaroscuro kind of way it's filmed, with shadows and deep focus shots of him and I think it's Gene Simmons playing Ophelia. He's trying to be artistic would be a sort of slightly disparaging way of saying it, but he really wants to avail himself of the technical facility that film offers. At the beginning of his career in the early 30s, again, it's still film with a kind of stiffened feel. It's not going to be the same as, Martin Scorsese making Mean Streets, sort of 30, 40 years later. It's not going to have that limber quality, that sort of sweaty quality, that freshness. So I think it's just that, as you say, he begins to appreciate and realize that he did film down early in his career, and he masters it. And in that interim period, the big parts, I mean, I'm sort of, in a way, I don't think the classical roles are sing-songy, but I can see that it's a rhetorical style of delivery, because these are moments, especially with Henry V, where you're trying to create, a soaring, tempest of heroic invective that plays for the purposes of aligning this with a moment in Britain's, Second World War, where they need to make the final bloody push to the end, and this is the rousing stuff. But I agree, it can come off badly for many people. I found it, as many of the older actors I talked to who were brought up on Olivier films, I found it electrifying, and even more so with Richard III, because then he has a much more mobile and fluid and needling way of connecting the verse with the character motivation and the camera. And as I said, this sense of Olivier being about a career about concealment, there's always a sort of thing of breaking the fourth wall to some extent. With Henry V, it's because of the framing of we go back to Elizabethan England, the play is being done in a theatre, and Olivier's there as a kind of jobbing actor. You see him before the play. He's kind of feeling slightly poorly, he's sort of having a bit of a cough before he goes on stage, but he does it anyway. What a trooper, And then it sort of breaks out into the quote real world. But the acting style is still sort of elevated, kind of energized in that way. When it's coming to Richard III, it's more an appreciation of film, and he's using the camera to sort of inveigle you in and make you complicit as the viewer. And the way he delivers the verse actually does have an exciting muscular feel, because, as Olivier himself said, you've got to be bringing a character that's the only possible way he could speak. It's the sense in which you have the cleaving between the old and the modern actor, younger actors often intimidated by Shakespeare because it seems full of artifice. And Olivier is saying, well, what you really have to do is contrive the means by fair means or foul to move yourself into a place where that artifice is internalized and fully natural for that person. So it is always going to be a heightened form.
I remember Peter Brook in The Empty Space says exactly this about Olivier. And he says, because Olivier lived in Brighton, I think, for all of his life. And on the train, he'd like have his newspaper up in front of his face, and he'd be just making his muscles remember the shape of the words.
Yeah.
Brooke says, Olivier is the sort of perfect example of the actor who his whole muscular body is at his conscious command. So he just masters all of that so he can control it. And I suppose my point earlier was more that you can see in these later films, after a lifetime of that,
yes,
the control he has is remarkable. And I actually think modern actors, well, I would love to see more modern actors do that. Kind of impossible in our circumstances, but to have that kind of control and muscularity still on screen and be naturalistic would be very interesting to see.
Yes, he develops because as all actors are, they're sort of heavily context dependent. You have to suit the action to the word and the word to the action. And in terms of the the formats, to put it crudely, this is something, as you say, he manages to get back on that train, towards his middle age and end of his life, and become the thing that people feel that he couldn't possibly be. But he is also playing characters with that level of concealment and something of the heroic. And for a contrast with the American acting sensibility, it's that we live in a kind of postmodern age of irony, and there's a sort of sense of self-consciousness about containing the heroic. So the people who we see in the films, they're not so much heroes as anti-heroes. These kinds of characters, you sort of if you were hanging around with one of if you were hanging around with Jimmy Conway, De Niro's character in Goodfellas, I mean he's riveting to watch, but you wouldn't find it a comfortable experience in reality, So he can almost seem. I mean, I don't think he seems heroic in the film, but you know what I mean. He has a magnificence about him, and because he has an energy of violence about him that is part of what I think is the focus in the American world, is of acting out all of those kinds of impulses. And that's why a lot of it focuses on sort of this sort of uncontained violence of masculinity, where with Olivier, it's all about this heavy containment, this sharpness of the energies boiling behind, but he asserts it with a kind of needle rather than with a saber.
Is there something unmanly about acting? I'm just going to kind of flesh this out a bit. And is that connected to the breaking of verse, right? So if you think of like, because you watch those old sort of Shakespearean Olivier films, they're kind of my lord, they're very like, they kind of drive it through all of them. They're all kind of quite clear. There's an element of masculine intelligence to it. There's muscular intelligence, understanding of verse, and actually you should be smart enough to follow this, right? You kind of, as you get like the post-Brando era, Brando, James Dean, this kind of cracking of the man, right? Where all of a sudden James Dean is crawling around on his knees, crying about how much his dad has hurt him, there's all the and then if you think like we did the gangster episode, you've almost got like a reaction to that with like gangsterdom in films. So they go so they sort of method acting becomes like ultra masculine and everyone's playing lunatics.
Yes.
I just wondered that, is there like is there something in it? Because when I'm watching him do the Henry V, Hamlet's a little bit more kind of emotionally connected in some ways. It's slow. But I am wondering, why are you not breaking I'm not saying you should break the verse all the time, by the way, as an actor, but he doesn't. It just feels to be very like
that's where there's a bit of cognitive dissonance for me here, because I don't see that, I don't hear that. I feel actually it's some of the best delivery ever, but it's again,
Simon,
it's a
you've
question.
got to acknowledge that St. Crispin's Day.
Exactly, yeah. Well, this is the thing I was thinking about. This thing of he elevates the note.
So you actually do feel connected with it?
Yes, because he preserves a kind of a build during the scene and a stillness and a poise as he's delivering it. And of course, it can sound, I mean, this is the difficult thing. It can sound stagey and rhetorical. And yes, he artificially raises the note at the end upon St. Crispin's Day. And it goes up. And you think, is that a theatre technique to sort of penetrate this sort of sound of the crowd going, hurrah? So you kind of, you hit the high note, so to speak, and it's heard, and that he's replicating that. But the way in which, as you say, breaking the verse is an important thing to think about. You can't make it into kind of slangy prose. You can't break it up too much. You can't, the thing they always say about verse acting is you act, the emotion on the line, not between the line. And some of the best acting is some of Olivier's, I think, from a Shakespearean point of view, is the stuff in Richard III, because it just has this kind of pace and this variation in tone. I don't hear it as being metrical in as much as you guys might be sensitized to it. And again, I think that's context dependent, because you're largely in a genre of working in wall-to-wall naturalism now. And so I think the sensitivity is much greater. Whereas I'm sort of seeing this in a way like it's the English kabuki. It's got the sort of the poise and the color and the energy and the finesse of an artificial form, such as you might see, but the power is still carried. And there's something, as I say, about Olivier and gestural acting and physical acting. I've used this comparison with you before. When you just look at the way that sometimes a single gesture can pull you into that moment. There's a great moment in Richard III where it's the Barnard's Castle scene. The mayor and the citizens have been there pleading with him to become king, and he's giving it the reluctance, no. And then eventually he agrees to do so. He's with a couple of holy men at his Bible, when they're begging him to be the king. And once he's won them over, he jumps down from this gallery. He grabs a bell rope and he slides down to the ground. So he's paying a kind of homage to the sort of Douglas Fairbanks Jr. kind of school of heroic acting. And then he walks forward to meet Ralph Richardson playing Buckingham, and he puts his hand out, to kiss the ring, and Richardson is, it's like the scene in The Godfather, everybody's kind of thinking about, what do I do now? And Richardson takes the hand to kiss the ring, and then Olivier forces his hand downwards, so Richardson has to kneel on the ground as well. And again, it can seem like a very stagey gesture, but it makes a powerful point about where power has shifted to at this moment, and that defines the sort of the arc of the character into his descent into paranoia, because he has now captured everything he ever wanted.
Are we too stupid to understand? Like, this is this is an interesting discussion for us to have. I think is that perhaps this is our problem. It's like classical music sometimes, right? It's people won't listen to it. They'll just want to listen to a quick kind of modern song,
Yeah.
and actually the classical music is superior, but it does take time to understand it.
Well, it's not stupid.
Cultivation to understand it.
Cultivation, perhaps. So if you understand, and you can sit there and watch, you can take the time to watch 3 hours of Hamlet done properly on the verse, where they all know the thoughts, they know the whole thing. Is there something? I think what me and Ollie are trying to do with these podcasts is kind of work out where we are with acting. Like, where have we gone wrong? Where can we improve? How can we, me and Ollie are both trying to improve as actors ourselves all the time, and we're working with other actors. So we're always thinking about,
I would say to you, it's not stupidity. It's a kind of sensitivity, as I say, especially in the modern industry, which I've not worked in, but I've got an appreciation for, the temperature of how people are thinking about things. I mean, I see professional actors, they watch something and they'll wince at something that's, that was just way too much. Yeah. And to me, it seems like, that was great. That was fantastic. It was like he was waving a sword in the air and shouting, and it was great. There's a sensitivity about, like with music and genre, they have their strengths, and you can sensitize yourself to it, but also we can also relax about it. If it doesn't meet you at a certain point, if it doesn't touch you or move you or energize or excite you, that's fine. And the thing I'm talking about here that you're saying we should wonder about in relation to modern performance is, can we exercise the size involved with the heroic, or when it comes to directing theatre? This is a thing. When I worked at the RSC for a time, in a publishing role, not really anything special, but I was very close to watching the acting company a lot. And there was a thing that people felt there was a diminution of the art of spectacle. There was a conscious attempt to sort of play things down and make them kind of prosaic and small. And I think someone like Brooke or someone would say, well, theatre does have to have this sense of occasion and spectacle, and this centrality of the moment on the stage, even if the stage is as basic as a line drawn on the ground. It has to have a specialness about it to sound a bit kind of twee. And that's something that, when I was at the RSC, they were conscious, I think, of lacking a bit. They were throwing lots of money at productions, but they weren't necessarily getting exciting results. And then one day I actually said to them, the people in the sort of, there was a casting, and there was one of the directors was there as well. And I said, well, why don't you get someone interesting in, like Stephen Burkhoff, to do something? And people were like, oh, no. Because there was a sense in which it was felt the ebullience of personality that came with, a particular actor and a particular style would be in excess of what audiences would tolerate. And there was a shyness and a self-consciousness about, you can see that. I think when you are given a script, one of the things that to me distinguishes good actors and great actors is, people who appreciate the tone of a script. Sometimes, a script, it's not reported naturalism. There was a play back in I think it was the late 50s, Gielgud talked about. People referred to it euphemistically as the dope play. It was called The Connection. And I think it was a play about drug addicts, and it was done by one of the kind of actors studio type theatres. And it sort of went on for like 5 hours or something. And it was kind of living with these kind of people who were drug addicts. And Gielgud went and saw it, and it was like, well, it's all very well, but it's kind of tedious. It's not the concentrated element of a dramatic work, which is necessarily a distillation of reality, and not a documentary. And this particular play about, it was thought to be wonderful because it was authentic and it was gritty and it was real, but it sort of then lost, like Breaking the Verse, it lost the rhythm of something you could then tune into very easily. It was worthy, and it was descriptive, and it was detailed in its way. And those are great things to be lauded, but then it always involves a compression and a condensation of elements that I think we've become shy of, because we think, well, that's stagey now. That's kind of false in some way. Actually,
completely agree.
Yeah.
I feel like there's been two things going on, which we're kind of describing: a distrust of rhetoric, and this view of rhetoric as seen as inherently inauthentic and
because of politicians,
a lie. But absolutely. So that sort of degraded the voice, degraded speech, degraded energy of speech, right? And simultaneously with that, a distrust of big eccentric personalities.
Yes.
And then when they both are happening at the same time, you get a really flat theatrical culture, right? That's suspicious of spectacle and speech, doesn't really know the meaning of things, and is just made up of rather boring conformist people.
Do you think that's an experience you guys can relate to in the professional world? Because there was there's a number of key books I was going to say that have influenced me as an actor. I mean, I'll just quickly run through them.
Yeah.
One, Simon Callow's book, Being an Actor, first thing I came across in the mid-'80s, really influenced me. Another major book, Anthony Sher, Year of the King, and again, this is about a sort of outside-in construction of character. And various other things, Playing Shakespeare, the John Barton book about verse speaking, the great series, which you can probably find on YouTube, and I Am Hamlet, Burkhoff's book, about his experience of playing Hamlet at the Roundhouse in 1980. And again, it's a kind of blow by blow of the play as he is the character, what he's thinking about, the imaginative work of acting. You guys have talked before about bring action to a scene. It's like you don't go onto a stage and wring yourself like a sponge to cry and cry all over the stage, which is what Olivier said he wanted to do when he started. Bring emotion. You construct the reality of the action of the scene, and I think, according to Stanislavski, those pressures will elicit emotion naturally, given the depth of commitment and the detail on which you work. And as a university actor or an amateur actor. I was always trying to approach work in that spirit of creating detail. And of course, the amateur scene is not like that. They don't have the sensibility of saying, what are we doing on stage here? I'm saying, well, we're working in an office and I'm filing some stuff, and then I'm putting some stuff on a trolley and then getting a cup of tea. You're filling in all the detailed actions, and they're like, no, that's all too much, because they see stage as a kind of rhetorical space. The amateur actors, they have a conceit that people have about verse, that you just sing it like a spell and people will be charmed, whereas I think, no, I want to bring reality to this. People very, very rarely in life just stand in a space and do absolutely nothing. They might be doing something. They're trying to light the cigarette, but the wind is blowing it out, or, they're sort of getting annoyed by a stray hair that's flicking on their head, or something like that. They're always doing something. They're always purposive with relation to their conflicts with themselves, with the other people on stage, and with their environment, to put it, in crude terms.
Yeah, we've sort of we've spiraled down in naturalism towards it's somewhere that feels now that there's nothing left. It's like we're so it's so common to be told,
Yeah,
less is more, do nothing, all this sort of stuff, and you end up going, and it's awful because there's some truth in it. You do something on camera, and you're like,
sure.
If it's too big, it looks a bit. It just doesn't work for.
Yes.
But then you do but then we end up in this situation where we've got this kind of empty culture of performance, empty culture of art, and TV and film is just like one thing, the other. Everyone's doing less, less is more, less is more. What's going on inside? And I'm thinking, well, I don't know what the hell is going on inside of anyone now, right? And we need to there's the director Yorgos Lanthimos. Have you seen any Yorgos Lanthimos films?
No. I've heard the name.
He's a European director. I think maybe Austrian or something. Anyway, but his films are kind of mad because they are just very weird, right? He style of performances is like Colin Farrell's in one, Ben Wishaw's in one, and it's a really. And I've auditioned for one of them actually, and there's something interesting in it because it's not life, it's just bonkers, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what am I trying to say here? He's a director who seems to be breaking convention, saying, why don't we just make people do this, and why don't you just like that, and why don't you just say nothing there and do weird things, like what are we doing with performance? But we are.
Yes.
I'm resting towards trying to work out like what we can do to rejuvenate performance, and is there a style? And this is the question of the podcast: is what comes after Brando? And this is I got this because a famous actor, very famous actor, working with a friend of mine on set, he said to her. He said, "What comes after Brando?" He said, "We've sort of done that now for like 70 years."
Yes.
And we don't quite. It's almost like, what do we do? And so we're sort of delving into Olivier here to go like, what did he do? Who is this man that we brought kind of the old world that we should have moved on from because it was too hammy? And I'd sort of love to see an actor walk into a room and kind of even give me a sing-songy Henry V would be kind of gorgeous, wouldn't it? So yeah. Any thoughts?
It's a thing that where there's as you say, it's almost that you have to get rid of this fetish. In a way, there's a bit in not that one, Anthony Sher, Year of the King. He's at the RSC rehearsing Richard III, and he's in the same company as Roger Allam. And Roger Allam has this kind of catchphrase where he says, well, anything you can do, I can do less of. And that is where it develops into something quite fetishistic, that everybody is tripping over each other to do less. It's all in the eyes. You're on a 25-foot screen in a cinema, or you're just on a high definition TV that's enormous, and people are they're just registering. And I've done this myself. I rehearsed. I was wanting to be an actor director when I was young, and I did Richard II when I was 19. I acted and directed it, and there was a scene in there where Richard is being berated, and I sat at a table just taking this in and going through it internally, and people said, "That's fantastic. We saw it all happening in your eyes," which is a great feeling, But there's an element of me that then said, yeah, okay. But then I tipped the table over at the end and I threw it across the stage because I wanted that release of that tension. It's the thing that, you hear the anecdote in Jack Nicholson when he's doing The Shining, and he's trying, Kubrick famously makes them take and retake, and Jack is being very natural. And he says to Kubrick, well, I don't know what more I can do, Stanley, and Kubrick says, well, Jack, it's very natural, but it's not very interesting. And so sometimes you do have to have that abandonment that you're talking about with, that film director there, where maybe it is going to seem strange. It is going to seem reckless. It's going to seem excessive. And Olivier always took the view of he would learn his lines, come to rehearsal fully learned off book, because that way he could get stuff out of his system early on if it was going to be too much. But it's also the thing of going against the American thing, the sort of, I'm caricaturing the studio method a bit, but the thing of leaving it to the last possible minute so it can be kind of flexible and so on, and sort of natural and seem spontaneous. And Olivier, I very much agree with. You learn the lines so that they are second nature, so that you can do anything with them. You don't have to preserve this sort of aura of it kind of just being thought of for the first time. Yes, you're trying to convey that it is being thought of for the first time, but that's the skill of your acting that's doing that. It's not coming to set without having learnt your lines because you want to keep it loose, and all of that kind of thing. So I think there is the art of concealing the art. And he is a man whose career is about the concealment between the wigs and the nose putty and all of that stuff. And the revelation has got more intensity because it's coming through this strain of concealment, rather than the American approach, which owes a lot to the fact that it's taking place post-Freud, post-psychological analysis, and the sense in which the actor is there to kind of just empty himself out of all his experiences and become spent on the stage. I mean, Olivier observes this when they're doing Prince and the Showgirl with Marilyn, and Paula Strasberg's wife, is on set with Marilyn, trying to basically give Marilyn psychological buttressing all the time in order to perform. And Olivier eventually realizes why he can't get anything out of her. And he says, well, she's a model. If you say to her, we want you to, you stick your bum out or do this, turn this way, she responds instantly. But if you try to get her to do acting, she just doesn't conceive of it. And you get ridiculous things like Paula Strasberg is there sort of saying to Marilyn, think of Coca-Cola and Frankie Sinatra, and so it becomes a very differently defined world. And I'm not being disparaging, because Olivier admits, he says, look, well, other people got great stuff out of Marilyn. So there's something there about the technical barrier of how you direct and work in film, and how you conceive of being an actor and acting and delivering a performance.
Mark Rylance actually says that Marilyn Monroe is his favorite actor because he doesn't know. You never know. You get the sense that you don't know what she's going to do next.
Yes.
And that there is a certain aliveness that's happening there, isn't there? I think so. Our task, as I see it, is along the lines of trying to expand the potential of acting, right? And how can we, because that informs the stories you could tell, the energy you can create. And I just wonder if, the director that you're describing, Morgan, the ways in which we see this done in modern times, it tends to just be, this is just like weird for its own sake.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just big and it's weird.
Yeah.
And that is meaningless, right?
Yeah.
So, and I feel like, if Olivier saw that, he would find it meaningless. So is there a way that we can connect size, muscularity of performance with meaning? And I suppose maybe the meaning is the energy, right? I mean, you watch those Olivier performances, the meaning is the forward thrust of it. And he's in his element when he's playing those forward thrusting characters. And as I said before, the energy is just kinetic and mesmeric. So maybe there's a new vitality that we can explore in acting by trying to push into the energy, forward thrustingness of character.
I wonder if it's about withdrawing certain stimuli. Very much with Shakespeare, I was when I put on a production, Richard II, as I said, and then one of Henry V, and did the same thing again. And I was thinking about Shakespeare's theatre as, an oral and an oral tradition. And, this sense in which, when you see people in the Elizabethan period say, I went last night to hear a play. Yeah. The primacy of voice and of sound. And Olivier is an actor who benefited an awful lot from that, in the sense that Brando, took such, career impetus from film. Olivier obviously took impetus from things like this. It's the record of the whole of the soundtrack of Richard III, not the music, the whole actual dialogue from the film as well, on 4 or 5 LPs. And again, you've got endless stuff of Olivier doing speeches.
I'm loving your gear.
This is my Olivier
Yeah.
drip. And then you got the soundtrack from Henry V with the sort of the model on the front. So it's all a thing of, in a way, like Churchill's reputation was cemented by putting his stuff out, on record as a great, rhetorician. Olivier benefited from that primacy of voice, and it was the contrast, as I still think it does contrast with Gielgud, much more sing-songy. Gielgud, oh, that this too solid flesh would melt for and resolve itself into a dew. That's the singy Gielgud I'm thinking of. Olivier, actually in the film, he does that much more downbeat, actually, and perhaps he is in danger of breaking it up too much.
What is the purpose of performance? Is it to hold a mirror up to nature, and are these actors just reflective of the times they live in?
I don't know. Nature. Good question. I mean, I've always been much more moved by a heightened reality. I mean, this is going to maybe sound a bit, pathetic, from the sublime to the ridiculous. But, one of my favorite films is something like With Nell and I, which is written in a form of heightened dialogue that just trips along and doesn't have any kind of longueurs or, beats that miss. It's kind of like verse in a way. It's kind of got a rhythm of life, to sound kind of corny, but it kind of pulses along with its heightened quality, the sort of almost extremes of emotion, but that they are filtered through a kind of a delicacy. And sometimes a ferocity of performance approach. There's there's an enormous variety in it. And sometimes in some Shakespeare plays, this is done better than others. You've got plays that are very little done now, like the Henry VI plays, but they are this kind of rambunctious cavalcade of rhetoric and violence and heroism and downbeat comedy, outrageous, kind of theatricality and poignancy and loss and depression, and cruelty and all sorts of things that come up, but you have to sit and watch them for 9 hours, and then you have to do another 4 hours.
They're really, I like the Henry VI trilogy.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's Richard III is the.
So all in all, you're looking at about a sort of 13-hour watch to do the whole of that part of the cycle. But there's phenomenal variety in those plays, and they're often dismissed as kind of, well, they're the early action plays of Shakespeare. But I think in a sense they bring us back to something which is much more like a communal experience of a reflection of life, because it has all the sort of mismatches in tone and chaos of life that actors often look at a part and say, well, how do I go from this scene to this scene, this speech to that speech? The tone is so different. How do I capture that? And of course, teachers will say, well, you play the inconsistencies, you just, take that in your stride and the tone will it'll work. But I think, again, a lot of it is about that, the mix of material that you use and the approach. Again, as I say, I think stripping back and focusing the attention intensely on things like voice. I mean, again, going back to Berkhoff's book, I Am Hamlet, this great moment when he opens the show at the Roundhouse. It's done in a kind of very simple style. Everybody's sitting in the Roundhouse, this cavernous castle-like building, stone walls, dark, dark, dark. The lights go down. There's a single drum beat. Boom. The lights come up. The cast are sitting on the stage in a row of chairs, and they're just making the noise of the wind as it whistles round the battlements at Elsinore. And they're just focusing the audience right in. And then they become the doors and the corridors of this little, this little world that they create. And they imaginatively take you back using the actor's body and the voice. I think Berkhoff went to Jacques Lecoq in Paris. I knew a few people who did.
Yeah, he did. He did only for a year, I think.
Yeah.
We did a podcast on his. We know Stephen Berkhoff relatively well, and we did a podcast on his whole life. I think was it Webber Douglas and was it Webber Douglas Ollie and Jack Lecoq?
I think so. Yeah, I can't remember. It wasn't Gaulier. It was Lecoq rather than Gaulier.
Yes.
And then like an evening class, and he's an interesting character for us, isn't he? Because he is sort of trying to do.
Well, so he, like in direct answer to your question, he would be no. he would probably say, no, performance is supposed to create a heightened, elevated style. But it's such an important question. Like, should we, as actors, should we be working towards behaving like people who we meet in the street? Right, and with most scripts, that's probably what you're going to have to do.
Well,
Yeah,
no,
it feels it's very limiting.
Yeah.
I could depict half the people I'm seeing in East London just would be mental.
But that's the other thing, is that we often over exaggerate how naturalistic people are in life. There's some people you meet be like, if I did like, well, I'm not going to say, but it's someone I know. I'm like, if I did your voice, how you actually sound on stage,
Exactly.
people would think I was
People
mental.
people wouldn't believe it. And, this is the thing that you had, you have the period of, people like Daniel Day-Lewis, and it becomes a cliche, but, everybody wins an Oscar for playing a disabled person. It's that kind of sense of, and I've observed people, with physical handicaps, intellectually handicapped people, things like that. And
win the BAFTA for playing someone with Tourette's, which is very, very in vogue.
That's just been taken. Yeah. I mean, but do you know what I mean? As you say, I saw a guy coming down the stairs at a railway station, and I studied his movements, and I knew a guy at uni as well. He was disabled, and I thought, if I imitated them, as a performance, people would not believe it. That's the problem. We have an idea of naturalism that, in a way, suffers. I was very interested in your show about The Office and the way that generated a sense of naturalism. But really what it's about is a kind of comedy of embarrassment, the profound way in which we triangulate ourselves in social situations as to what's acceptable by bringing in someone who's completely unacceptable and allowing them to kind of wreck the room. And then everybody kind of sort of calibrates their response around that, and sort of stands off at a safe distance.
Yeah. Can I just berate the modern world again? One of the problems is that we don't have men of character the way they did in the past. Like I'm thinking of Laurence Olivier narrating World at War, the documentary. I don't know if anyone's seen that, but it's the gravitas he has in his narration.
Yeah,
is
just the opening of that. Down this road on a summer's day in June 1944, the soldiers came. Nobody lives here now.
Yeah. It's like there's 20 parts. There's 20 of them, aren't there? So I'm working through it. So, when I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm kind of, I suppose I'm sort of wondering if like there is this tragic truth that like we just don't have men of character anymore, like in the way that you did in the past. These kind of people who've been through the war. It's kind of, these characters don't exist. We're just like, you get, I suppose, I'm thinking maybe get like UFC fighters. They're pretty hard, aren't they? There are. We're expecting actors to reflect the world.
Yeah. And as you say, you end up then saying, well, performance has to kind of we can give permission for that sort of acting, but it means we're going to be focusing on films about gangsters or about extreme personalities,
Right.
like a UFC fighter or a great drug addict or something else. It's always going to be that sort of way. I mean, I think to sort of get back to your question about where do we go, I think it is that reacquaintance of physicality and voice, and maybe like Lecoq's work, the students I was always very impressed with. My girlfriend at the time went to Lecoq, and people like Simon McBurney, Théâtre de Complicité, and I kind of love physical theatre. I don't know how they do it, but I love it. It's kind of magic, and there's just something about that thing of Complicité. They started 3 people, costumes, and a suitcase, and the show comes out of the suitcase, and everything else is done with the body. I don't mean in the corny mime sense. I mean, they create worlds with bodies, and there's kind of a sense in which you are then inveigled into this sense of the heightened on stage when you use physical acting techniques that really drags people in. They did a version. I was at Lecoq School at the time watching my girlfriend do a performance because Lecoq was still alive then. They said they do a scratch night kind of thing where they do a film as a piece of physical theatre, and they did Apocalypse Now. And I thought, this is interesting. How are they going to do Apocalypse Now? And the actors were all on stage kind of quite still. And then they started with their fists beating their chests. And you got the sound of the helicopters kind of coming over, because it was a brilliant sound. And they just did it incredibly creatively and intensively. And you capture these essences, really. I think that's kind of what I'm saying about Olivier as well. You're capturing these essences of characters. It's not reportage. It's not pointing a video camera at people.
Mm.
It's not
And
slouchiness.
he goes to them, doesn't he? That's what I was sort of the character stuff he does so amazing is he's presenting you Othello as he finds it in Shakespeare,
Mm.
and
He reaches it rather than reducing it to him.
he really
Yes.
You know,
does that.
I'm thinking now that the whole, because I sort of disagree. I think there are, yes, maybe not a certain kind of character, but there are like so many characters in the
Yeah,
world,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Extreme eccentric characters, and in a way, naturalism is a kind of lie because which has the intended or otherwise consequence that it does kind of flatten our perception of reality, because
Yeah,
naturalism
yeah.
says this isn't a style. Right? This is not a style. This is just how things are.
Yeah.
And that has a feedback loop sort of effect that we go, that happens everything, right? And we
Yeah.
need to kind of break out of that in order to imaginatively expand as
Well,
well.
you were saying in the podcast the other day, Ollie, you were saying about modern art, you were like, well, it's a reflection of stuff. And do you remember this? I think it was with Eleanor, we were saying, well, what should we do then? Should we break it? Should we suddenly get painters to paint like, a Caravaggio style thing now and then force them to do that?
Yes.
You're like, you're not allowed to do
Yeah.
naturalism now, everyone. I'm sorry, you're going to have to come. You're a styer and you're going to have to, and it's going to have to be ancient Greek. Well, yeah, but then that wouldn't be a reflection of the dull sort of
Yes.
TikTok-fied, pornographied kind of
Mm.
lemming generations we seem to have around us.
Yeah. I mean, I think I was saying the point that I can still see that it is artistically legitimate to do that.
Right.
To comment on the modern reflector. I wouldn't say that is illegitimate artistically, but I agree. I think the focus for us should be on elevating in many different ways through performance the repertoire of behavior and idea.
Yeah. Resource and variety of technique. And as I said, that skill of an actor to capture the tone of a piece. You're going to perform Beckett differently to Pinter, differently to Anouilh, different to Feydeau, different to Marlowe or Webster. You're going to sort of pick up on these kind of genres in which, if you look at, let's say, a political drama like House of Cards on the television, Ian Richardson, back in the 90s, the way in which it contrived to mesh Shakespearean elements of the character breaking through the fourth wall, saying, "Look at me, aren't I naughty? But I'm not going to say sorry." And taking you on that sort of, again, that sort of cavalcade through the notional world of Westminster, treachery and betrayal, and then keeping that, in balance with a sense of, well, all of the other characters are playing themselves naturally, so to speak. They're all sincere in their affect. It's just that it is a sort of slightly heightened and rollicking version of lust, murder, and betrayal that contains a story's energy that says something to us about the truth of that world, that sort of seamy, dirty, dishonest place that the characters take us to. And I think that unself-consciousness about retrieving that excitement of the concentrated, not being self-conscious, and actually, it's not about being a ham or being excessive. It is about saying, no, this is a big story. This is a large-scale story. This is something where we say we are going to create. And Stanislavski always has a negative sort of spin on this, effects, in a way. He talks about sort of, I think, the terrible Italian actor who he models himself against, and said this actor, he just creates cheap effects on stage. But Olivier thought about that as, no, well, I do create effect, and that's a function of the technical performance in which I'm trying to reach this house of 2,000 people across this cavernous space. And so in so doing, I will need to contrive something. And at the same time, there are the moments of honesty where you can bring in the intensely personal, and Archie Rice can say, look at these eyes, I'm dead behind these eyes, and bring it down to the minutiae. But that all rests on the fact that he's in the empty theatre with all the space around him, eschewing the physical. So it's the contrast between, the sense of his reputation as the dynamo and the moment of stillness where he says, I'm just broken.
Yeah, there's a great story about Olivier on stage when he's doing, I don't know, probably Hamlet or something, and he walks past the wings and tells his fellow actors, he says, I've got the fuckers right where I want them. and he's talking about the audience. So he's in the middle of the performance, he's kind of scaling the stage, tells his mates, he's like, look, I'm in control of the entire theatre. And I love that kind of technical swagger and the fact that he can kind
Yeah.
of command that. Before, we'll probably wrap up in a sec, but I think one thing to throw in about Olivier, and I think this is really worth mentioning, is that his legend is from the stage as well.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's interesting. We've been obviously using bits of his film footage to analyze him, but his legend is from the stage, and you will work with people who will talk to you about Olivier, or you might do. It's obviously
Mm.
it's a while now, isn't it? He was born in 1907, but I worked with an older actor once, and I said to him, "Did you ever see Olivier?" And he said, "I did." And I said, "Well, what was he like?" He said, he was beyond anything you could imagine. He's the greatest actor you'd ever see." And I think I kind of wanted to put that on record on this podcast, is that like he had a legend in the flesh on stage that we don't fully know of, right? Because we didn't see him.
Yes.
And I think that is the magic of theatre, really, isn't it? It's the magic. It is a private space, private public space in some ways. It's not filmed, and you go there and have that relationship with these live performers that will never,
Yeah.
but no one will ever get again. And I think in the age of AI and all this sort of stuff, it actually has quite kind of potent value. And yeah, it's nice to think of that. And
It is, to use the phrase, I don't know if this is the phrase that was used about the murder of Christopher Marlowe, but it's the sort of ultimate moment of drama. It's a mighty reckoning in a little room, you know. And they talk about the Olivier Theatre as it was designed as like the corner of a room. All the energy is kind of focused to this dynamic point at the center of the stage. It's about taking this seemingly, too small a thing, like in the chorus speech at the beginning of Henry V, can we cram within this wooden O? Can we do it? Can we make a world come alive in the smallest of physical spaces? And I think it's a return to that sort of ambition, in a way, I think, that attenuates an audience towards this sense of we can go back, we can go big, we can go heroic, we have to. We've got kind of nothing else to work with. We've got all of the sort of CGI spectacle of 4K HD shows that have been, processed to death. But there is something, like you say, about the energy and danger of being in the room with the guy. And I'll tell my Olivier story now because I've got to cram it in. But I mentioned it to you guys before, but for the benefit of the audience, I worked when I was at the National with this actor, Peter Woodthorpe. Lovely guy. He played Gollum on the BBC Lord of the Rings on the radio back in the early 80s. And Peter was in the company with Olivier when he did Coriolanus. And famously, in the Coriolanus death scene, Olivier would backflip off a platform that was, 10 or 15 feet above the stage in his death agony. And as he backflipped off, two actors would catch him by the ankles, and he would hang suspended and bloody, in his death throes. And Peter said, he was talking to me about it, and he said, Simon, those two boys, every night they were absolutely shitting themselves. They would drop him, but it was fucking thrilling, And
yeah, that's a lovely, lovely vision, isn't it? And yeah, just to think of this man, and I think to remember that people throughout the land would talk of this man as like the greatest stage actor ever, and I just find that quite magical. And I would have wished I could have seen him on stage. I remember, I think Edward Bond said to me, he said, "Yeah, his presence in a room." He said he just came, it just had this unbelievable presence.
can we get back to giving ourselves permission to generate presence in that way?
Yeah.
Absolutely, the naturalism of the actors of the American half century is unqualified, brilliance. We know it. We've seen it. But we've become inured to it because it's become everything. It has become the only way to be, to do less of everything. There is a place for saying that this should be a vital space in which we gather for that mighty experience. So
we can take permission to do that.
Yeah.
We do. We have.
Yeah. Does that feel like a natural endpoint? I don't know. Are we working down? Are you winked to be there?
I like it, Simon. I think it's good to say, I often say to students, you're allowed to be brilliant. And I think but I don't take that myself as advice as well. There's something there for us to think, to end on. And I think Olivier brilliant is a good word for him.
Yes.
So
Sparkling.
sparkling. There's another one.
Got loads more if you want.
I'll quote Peter Brook. Energy on stage is genius.
Ooh, love it, Simon.
So that's do it with energy.
The energy on stage is genius. So we thank you, Simon, for joining us for this hour on a
Pleasure. I'd love to come back.
Yeah, we'd love to kind of work through some stuff with you.
Actually, I am interested when people really are into acting, and the fact that you guys have even watched Olivier and have regard for him is marvelous to me, because I keep thinking, well, I'm like an old man now, and this is dead, and the kids don't care, and it's like, and that's fine. Things pass, but actually, once you sense
Are you
brilliance,
still casting us as the kids?
you feel
We'll
young.
take it.
We'll take it. We're hanging on.
I'm hopeful for you. Got a whole life ahead of you.
Well, Simon, we'll get you. We'll keep this going with you. We'll keep this a good one. Open up. We've got please, if anyone wants to, you can join us on Monday nights. We're doing 9 p.m. Zoom readings pretty much every week of the Greek plays, which is a very good place to think about size and grandeur. And we've got some events coming up. Please follow us on all the socials and YouTube, and if you can, leave comments, because they help the algos, don't they? Kind of boost the whole thing. So. And it's useful for us to hear people's feedback. So drop some stuff in the comments. Ollie, any parting words?
Just thank you for Simon. And I just wanted to say, when we've been doing the Project 39, a speech from every Shakespeare play, Simon, you are always the one to make such an intelligent comment. And it's always a comment that I'm like, I hope someone would make that. Like on Alec Newman's beautiful Macbeth, you said this, echoes of Tarkovsky's Stalker.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. I found that space, and I was like, "Oh, it's a bit Stalker-esque," and you noticed it, and I was like, very, very heartwarming.
I really enjoyed those.
So,
You find a great way
those.
to frame these performances, and that's important. It's not just pointing a camera any old way. You are taking us to a place with a specific intent, and that's great. And I encourage everybody to support you guys and give you loads of money.
Yes, if people do want to see more of us doing that in Project 39, please donate.
We're doing a fundraiser, so if you can help, any little helps. And shout out to the DOP, Mikey Simpson, because he'll be very grateful to hear that comparison. I know he's a big Tarkovsky fan. Yeah. There we go. Thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks for watching. We'll speak soon.
Thank you.